So we're going to talk about native bees in the garden. It's a fascinating topic. I love my native bees. I love honeybees too, but we wanted to share this because you probably are seeing native bees as our flowers start blooming and as they start awakening. First, I want to point out that most of the flowers in the world require an animal pollinator. So that can be many different kinds, but this is very important for the food that we eat and also for our wildlife to be able to have food. Specifically looking at bees, 75% of the fruits, nuts, and vegetables grown in the United States require bee pollinators. And 1 in 4 bites of food that we take is courtesy of a bee, and it's a huge part of our crop value. So also I have to point out what specifically is pollination. It's not just the transfer of pollen from flower to flower. It has to be flowers of the same species. That becomes really important when we're talking about why native bees are important. Here's some different pollinators that we have, beetles and butterflies and flies, and then we have our bees. So I'm going kind of fast because we have a lot of information and there's so much that we're going to cover today. But I do want to point out a few specifics, few specific types of bees, but then also what is not a bee. So this is a bee. You can see it's nice and fuzzy, and it's actually herbaceous, so it's going to be feeding on nectar and pollen. This is a wasp. Most wasps are not nearly as fuzzy. They can also drink nectar, but they are mostly going to be carnivores, or they prey on other insects. So then when we look more deeply into bees, we have honeybees, which are actually not a native species, and then we have our native bee species. So there's about 4,000 species here in the United States, about 20,000 worldwide. Here in the Missouri area, we have between 400 and 500 species. Now, most of these are going to be solitary in comparison to our honeybees, which actually are eusocial and live in a hive and work together. But most of our native bees are solitary, meaning that when an egg is laid, then they never really see another or interact with another bee of their species until it's time to reproduce. Most of them are going to live in the ground, though some of them will also live in cavities. That will be like the stems of plants. They can actually be better pollinators. We need more research on them. They're harder to study than honeybees. And often they can be, as I mentioned, better pollinators, and that's because they can visit flowers over greater distances, which means that they're transporting pollen over greater distances, which means that there's a better chance for genetic diversity. There are a lot of plants that require, as I mentioned before, native or require pollinators, and these are just some examples of some of the plants that are going to require that. So there are a lot of different kinds of bees. We can kind of divide them up into several different groups. This is one way to divide them up into groups: bumblebees, carpenter bees, leafcutter and mason bees, digger bees, cuckoo bees, longhorn bees, sweat bees, squash bees, mask bees, and polyester bees. We don't have time to cover all of those today, but we will go into depth, a little bit of depth into some of these. So bumblebees, these, you should probably start seeing the queen bumblebees out, if not now, but very soon. And these are going to be quite a bit larger than what you would typically see for bumblebees. There's a huge diversity of bees, and you can see that in this chart right here. Some are big, some are small, but the really big ones that are coming out here in the spring are the queen bees that are going to be starting the colony. So if you see those, let them be. And hopefully they'll be able to find a place nearby where they can start their colony and be successful throughout the season. Carpenter bees look very much like our bumblebees, but they have some distinct differences. You can tell the difference between a carpenter bee and a bumblebee by looking at their abdomen, and you can see that they are quite shiny. Now, carpenter bees can be a pest in human structures because when they build a nest, they're actually carving out a hole in your wooden structures. So that could be your deck, it could be your house, it could be a shed. So that can cause a problem, but you can also see that they're also pollinators, so they also are beneficial. So a good way to deal with them is make sure that all of your wood structures are painted and that perhaps they have some old wood that they can actually build their nest farther away from the house. I tend to find leafcutter bees more by finding what they do to my plants rather than even seeing them. And if you see these circular shapes cut into your leaves, these are going to be your leaf cutter bees. Now, this is what they can look like. A little bit hard to see, but I liked this image because you can see they are cutting out these almost perfect semicircles out of your leaves, and then they take that to provision their nest. Then we have digger and miner bees. So most of these are really quite small, though there is a range 6 to 15 millimeters. These are solitary ground nesters as well. I know that this one right here, I have a whole nest of these right outside my house in the backyard, which I will leave because I want to see them. They're ephemeral. I only see them in the spring, and then they're gone the rest of the year. This is a longhorned bee. There's quite a few in this group, these longhorned bees. This one looks also very much like a bumblebee. She's as big as a bumblebee, but not considered a bumblebee. But if you have these cone flowers, you might be able to find them in your yard too. Sweat bees, contrary to their name, they are not all attracted to sweat. And really, if they're landing on you, it's because they need that mineral, the minerals that can come from the sweat. Very docile bees, and there's a huge range of them. So this is probably what most people think of when they think of a sweat bee, is this little green bee. But there's more than just green bees in this group. And then, of course, we have squash bees. So these are a little bit larger than some of the other bees, the smaller ones that I was showing you earlier, but they're rather charismatic. And you can see that, well, they are specialists on squash, and they're really just a fun bee to have in the garden. So there's a lot of benefits for creating space in your garden for native bees. So enhanced crop yields, helping with preserving biodiversity in our yards. It's best for our ecosystems to be able to have this biodiversity in case something were to happen to any individual species. Then we'll have other species that can help fill in the gaps. Our native bees are really important for agriculture generally, for those biodiversity reasons, but also because of their power in being great pollinators. Also, it's important to note that when we improve habitat for our native bees, it's good for our honeybees, and the same for if we improve habitat for our honeybees, it's good for our native bees. It's also good for our frogs and toads and beneficial insects and birds, the environments, and also for us when we improve our environment for all of these animals. So just really quickly, what are some things that we can do to help, because populations are in decline for our native bees? First, you can learn more. Also, please plant more flowers. We're gardeners. We like to have flowers. This is your excuse to plant more. And when you're looking to plant more flowers, please consider native plants. Also, create more nesting sites. So that means in all the places that you have in your yard that you have mulch, maybe leave some areas that don't have mulch, because most of them are ground nesters. Also, keeping it dark at night is really important for all of our beneficial insects, but it actually can help our bees. Make sure that you use IPM principles, integrated pest management, and then share the word with others. And then very quickly, I just want to point this out, that if you do have to spray pesticides, there are some really critical things that you can do that will help our bees, and that's don't spray when blooms are present. That's because blooms bring in the bees. And so just please avoid doing that. And there's lots of different ways that you can avoid doing that. Garden for the bees this year.